Hi, welcome to episode 8 of the Wild Learners channel. Today we're going to be talking about critical thinking and making an argument against standardized testing. So we're just going to go ahead and jump into that. If you would do me a solid and like this video, I would appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. So before we really get into this, I think we need to define what critical thinking is. And I spent some time really researching it and thinking about my own definition of critical thinking and really what my objective is with critical thinking with my students. And this is kind of what I came up with. And I think that critical thinking is the objective analysis and evaluation of a topic or even an issue in order to form your own judgment. And I know that a lot of you, if anybody spends time online or listening to any TED Talks or anything like that, you know that a lot of people are arguing that kids are really struggling with critical thinking. They're so used to receiving information. I call it like a lot of input, but they're not given a lot of output options. So they are being kind of conditioned to take in all this information as truth. They're not getting any experiences or options to really mull it over, criticize it, or even think about it in a logical way. Instead, they're just supposed to like output that information that they're being received. And I can see this a lot from when I was in public school, and I still see it somewhat in our school as well, even with students that have been here for a couple years. It's really hard to get kids to think critically because it's something, as we're going to talk about later in this video, that you really have to learn and practice. And it's really hard if you're not seeing it modeled as well. But we'll get into that a little bit later. But why is critical thinking important? Well, for some of the obvious reasons that we just talked about, but there's a few others as well. So critical thinking helps empower you as a person. It's going to give you a voice. It's going to make it so that you can have choices, even if it looks like you don't have options. It's going to help build your confidence. It's also going to help you gather information efficiently. And I think this one is really important. Being able to, I guess I see this a lot in writing. So if I have older students who are supposed to be doing writing, like whether it's current events, reports, or even book reports or things like that, they have a really hard time gathering information and then forming their own opinions about the information. So that text to self connection has been really hard within the last few years, more so than I've ever seen it in my teaching career. I also think that critical thinking helps you process data a lot faster. It also helps you objectively analyze data, and I think that that's really important, being able to have an objective opinion about things. I think it also helps not just kids, but also adults avoid fallacies and even cognitive biases. And what I mean by that is being able to have critical thinking skills helps you be able to look at lots of different opinions, data, research, and be able to take all of that information and come to your own conclusion. And that's really important. Critical thinking, like I said, gives you autonomy over yourself. You're less reliant on other people for your choices. And I also think that the most important is it creates problem solvers. We want kids to be able to face a problem and be able to think about it in a quick way that's going to have a positive effect instead of a negative impact. And like I was saying earlier, critical thinking is really a lifelong endeavor. I think that even if you are a critical thinker, you are still mastering that. You're still working on that even as an adult. You are still taking information, you're researching, you're always practicing that. And I think that that is a skill that we don't give kids enough. We are so used to just giving them information, but not letting them do anything with it other than just spout out what we just said. We have a really bad habit, I think, in education to focus more on memorization of fact rather than the application of facts. And so critical thinking really helps them start practicing that, so when they're adults, they're more efficient at it. I think that critical thinking is most derived from through observation and seeing it modeled, like I said, from trusted adults, and also the ability to be able to practice what they're supposed to do in these situations with like problem solving and critical thinking. And so what I want to talk about and spend most of our time on today is how do we do that. So a lot of us would agree that these are problems that we're seeing in the classroom, problems we're seeing with our kids at home, maybe even problems we're seeing within the community, whether you're a Sunday school teacher or Boy Scout leader or whatever. So how do we really take what we know is a deficit with our youth, and how do we as leaders and role models really model this for them and help them create critical thinking habits? So here are some examples of ways that you can help promote critical thinking. And that would be create opportunities for problem solving, really promote creativity, allow students to have the autonomy to be creative, really promote project-based learning, so through communication and collaboration with their peers, give them decision-making power. And I think that can be kind of hard sometimes in education, okay, especially if you're in public school, because everything is so on a time frame, and you are expected to get certain outcomes, and you might not always get those outcomes if you're allowing students to have decisions in their learning. But it's also really important, and like I've said in a previous video, allowing them to make those decisions about their learning also gets their buy-in and makes the learning more applicable to their real life, which makes them want to actually work harder and see the value in what they're learning. So people that have high critical thinking skills, what we usually see from these people is that they have the ability to solve really hard problems. And I'm not just talking, academic hard problems. I'm talking about like even social, family, financial problems. They're able to look at a problem that they're having and be able to think of creative ways to help them navigate to a more positive outcome than maybe they'd be able to if they didn't have critical thinking skills. They usually have high confidence, and again, that's because they know their self. They usually have standards and expectations set in place for themselves, and most people want to meet those. We also see people that have high-level critical thinking skills be able to communicate clearly and effectively. And this is one that I've really been struggling with my students, is getting them to be able to communicate their feelings or communicate their problems, or even be able to communicate ideas. And that's because, again, when we were talking about the input-output, we're inputting a lot of data, but we're not allowing them to process it and output it in a way that applies to them, that has that self-connection. And because we're not doing that, when they are faced with scenarios and situations and experiences where they need to be able to communicate what they learned or communicate an issue they're having, they can't, because we have really kind of taken their voice away. People that have high-level critical thinking skills also are the ones that are coming up with new ideas and new solutions. That could be, people that are in like development situations, or even within like government or even small communities. We need people that can come in and bring in new ideas, bring in, new solutions to maybe old problems that haven't been getting solved. They also are a lot better at giving fact-based opinions rather than emotional-based opinions. And we definitely live in a society where emotional responses are becoming more and more common, and I'm so guilty of it myself, because a lot of the things that are going on in the world do bring about an emotional response. And I'm not saying emotional responses are bad. They're definitely not. I think that's how you know that something is important to you and that it makes you want to bring about a change. But it should not stop with an emotional response. after you have your period of emotional tension, I think it's really important then to sit back and reflect and think critically about it. Okay, why am I feeling this way? What can I do about this? And be able to take it from there. And unfortunately, if you don't have those critical thinking skills to be able to ask yourself, like, why am I feeling this way? Why do these people feel that way? Where should we actually be? It should probably be somewhere in the middle, right? You're not going to get there because you're not able to think critically. So you're going to stop at just the emotional response. And the emotional response isn't usually going to be one that brings about the change. It's going to be those critical thinking applications to how you're feeling. People that have high level critical thinking skills also can discern misinformation a lot easier than people that don't have high level critical thinking skills. And as everybody knows, we live in a day and age where there is misinformation everywhere, especially with, AI really coming onto the scene. We can see something that looks so real, sounds so real, that our immediate response might be, oh my gosh, like this really did happen, or this person really did say this. Whereas if we can step back a minute and think critically about it and research this person and maybe find like what their actual views are, or even just doing a quick Google search, because we can detach ourselves from that emotional response. A lot of people that don't have those critical thinking skills, like I said before, are just stuck on that emotional response. So they're going to be able to be misguided a lot easier than people that can think critically. Also, I think that a lot of people that lack critical thinking skills, unfortunately, are incapable of personal growth. That could be whether it's personal, it could be in their career, it could be relationship-wise, because everything is going to be based on emotion. And I think that self-reflection is a part of that critical thinking, being able to be like, okay, what could I have done that might have invoked this response from this individual? Or if I want to avoid the situation again, what can I do differently next time? Those are critical thinking skills. And being able to better yourself and better your responses is going to make it so that you can have healthier relationships. You can actually excel more at your career. Again, those communication skills we talked about, those are essential in careers. It's essential in your personal relationships, with your spouse and your kids. And so it's going to make you a better person being able to have these skills. So, how do we do it? How do we promote critical thinking skills with our students? And that's something that I'm always asking myself. As you know, if you've been following me, you know that I'm a huge advocate for project-based learning. Everything in our classroom, because we're a multi-age classroom, is collaborative. And sometimes I still want to make sure that even though we have these great things in place, that the work that I'm doing is, and having them participate in, is still going to promote critical thinking versus one person taking the load and the other one's just following through. So here are some ways that I have done it, and I try to make time for metacognitive reflection. So what that means is, like, especially I see this a lot during our reading time, because like I shared, a lot of my students really struggle to make that text to self or text to world connections. And some of that's normal, especially in certain age levels, because their worldview is very, very narrow right now. And they may not have had some of these experiences. But for the most part, a lot of the books that we read, they should be able to connect with and relate to. But giving them time to reflect. So what I have found is I was reading a new book like every day. And that was kind of our whole group reading time. And what I found is, even with the younger kids, I still do a lot of picture books with them. But overall, for our whole group, what I've been doing is chapter books. And I've been doing this because it allows time for processing. And it usually goes into more depth. And I like it because I can spread it over a longer period of time. And we can kind of revisit certain concepts or ideas that really help them focus more and reflect more on what the characters or whatever are experiencing in the book. And I think that that's really important. One of the hardest things, but the most important things that we can do as educators or leaders in our community is modeling and practicing our reasoning skills on our own. And that can be really hard because, like I said, we all have emotional responses. And sometimes, especially in certain situations, it's really hard to step back and not have an emotional response. And I think it's really hard sometimes in front of kids to always know, because we always want to have the right, or at least I always want to have the right answers. I always want to give them an answer. And sometimes I've been trying to teach myself, it's okay. Like sometimes not having an answer and telling them, I don't think right now is the right time for me to answer this, or I'm going to take a minute and think about that, is the best thing that I can model for them, because they can tell when I'm confused or frustrated in certain situations, and letting them see that I'm taking a moment to step back and reflect and think about it instead of just immediately responding is modeling critical thinking skills for them. I also think it's really important to ask open-ended questions. And I personally love asking open-ended questions because I'm always amazed at how much more students can know about content than I think they know. And by asking open-ended questions, I'm getting to see really where they are with the material. And a lot of times, they have a better understanding of the material than I would have assumed. Or maybe they weren't as ready for the material as I thought they would be. And asking those open-ended questions helps me as an educator know where they are with the content, one. But it's also getting them in the practice of communicating their ideas, their connection with the content. And again, like I said, that's a big part of critical thinking, is being able to have clear and effective communication. I think it's also important to teach information literacy. And I think that this used to be a huge topic when we were talking about like high school students, but in today's day and age, we really need to be even teaching our preschoolers and primary age students information literacy. If they're spending any time on iPads, phones, any type of online content, we need to be teaching them information literacy. And that is, it's going to look different for each age group, but teaching them things that they should look for if somebody's sharing information. Asking them to ask certain questions while they're listening to content to verify what they're hearing is true. For older kids, it's really important for them to know whether they can trust certain sites or sources, and teaching them the questions that they should ask when they're reading content and they're supposed to be analyzing it on whether that's going to be true, accurate, unbiased information. And I think that this is critical, and it takes a lot of time. And I think that's where a lot of teachers kind of give like a quick overview of it, and then they just let students go. But I think it's something that we need to spend just as much time with the students, teaching them and actually giving them pointed questions to be asking about the content that they're interacting with as they spend on the actual project themselves, because the quality of the project's only going to be as good as the material that they're getting. And that material quality is only going to be as good as the questions and sources that they're citing. And if they aren't equipped to be able to find that information in a positive and good quality way, their project isn't going to have the same type of learning benefits that it would. I also think that providing multiple perspectives is really important. And I think that's really easy. So for Thanksgiving, I think I've shared in a couple of videos, we've done a deep dive into the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags, and why the Pilgrims left England and how the Indians and the Pilgrims were interacting. And then, later we know that things did not stay as positive as they had when the Pilgrims first arrived. and we have looked into both perspectives. I think it's really important, though, as an educator, to be careful not to give your perspective. I think that it's really good to give the information clearly for both sides and allow the students to draw their own conclusions. I even share with my parents like what we're going to be learning about in a weekly newsletter so that they can even be involved in those conversations as well. And I think that that is key because for me, you know, I am a white woman, but I have Native American background. I am a Christian, but not everybody is. So I think that it's very critical to be able to give both sides of things, because all of our values don't always align, or we can have different perspectives on things, but being able to communicate those with one another in a positive way is the only way we're really going to bring around any kind of change or agreement and put an end to all of this fighting and disconnect between people. So I think that that's a really important part of the learning experience as well. I think that it's also really important, and this is something we talked about a lot in my STEAM and STEM-based learning, is giving students autonomy over their learning. So not all students, we know this, not all kids, not all adults learn the same way. So when it is available to you, I think allowing students to interact and with the content that they're learning in the way that best suits them is going to be really beneficial. Again, it's going to reinforce that learning more so because they're engaged with it. They're feeling successful in the way that they're approaching their learning. And it's going to really foster the way they learn. So for me, I am a very creative person. And I would do so much better at writing or drawing my perspective about, let's say like whatever we're reading in class versus acting it out. Like just sitting in front of this camera right now gives me anxiety. So I would be so much more focused on the way my presence is versus the content that I was sharing, and being able to allow them to do other avenues or have choice in the way they want to present it is really important, because you might have a student that loves theater and drama and like would love to act it out. That's going to stay in their long-term memory a lot longer. They're going to interact with it completely different than somebody who would not want that attention. But it becomes a more meaningful learning process for them, and it allows them to think more critically because they are going to put more time and energy and thought and care into what they're doing. And I think that that's really important. I think that it's also good to encourage respectful debate. And I think that this is not just applicable to high school students. I know a lot of high schools have debate teams, but I think it's really good even for younger kids. And I think it's really good to first set parameters to keep it respectful and to set standards for the way that we interact with one another. But being able to have children voice their opinions, voice their ideas, gives them that practice to be able to be good communicators. And debates is a really good way to do that because, one, you have to be able to make an argument, and that means that you have to have really good communication skills. But it also really makes you question why you believe something in a certain way, and it really makes you start asking a lot of questions. It calls for self-reflection, and again, as we just talked about, that directly aligns with critical thinking. I think that it's also important that we connect different ideas, learning approaches, and perspectives. So as I've talked about earlier, all of our content is all connected. And so I think that that's really important because it allows students to see that we don't live in a closed circuit system. Our lives are not closed circuit systems, right? Like everything within our lives are connected, and being able to see them and see that in the classroom helps prepare them then for life, and being able to, handle multiple different tasks at different times or make connections between, maybe their personal life and maybe their careers and things like that. So that's a really important one. And the one that I also want to stress is inspiring creativity. We have taken so many classes out of our school systems to push, reading and math. And I'm not saying reading and math aren't important, they are. But they would be way more effective if we weren't sitting at a desk for like 90 minutes. If they could do that in a more project-based, creative way, because humans are naturally creative. We are always wanting to create or build or, push the limits on things. And if we don't give students the environment to be able to do that now, they're not going to be able to be capable, or it's going to take them a lot longer to develop that skill than as an adult. And creativity really is where you start getting the skills to be able to think of those new ideas, those new concepts that we could really use in today's day and age. And I think that that's really important to promote in our students. So critical thinking, that's kind of like the short of it. There's so many great resources online. I encourage you to really go look at it. But I really want to spend a lot of time now talking about how standardized testing then correlates with this, because we all know that critical thinking skills are important. It's the number one thing employers are saying that their employees are lacking. Is something that we have heard teachers repeatedly say that their students can't do. So we need to really be able to help our students start developing these skills. But where does standardized testing fit into that? And some of you might know where I'm going with this, and others might. And I ask you to have an open mind and listen to me on this as I try to make the argument against standardized testing. So unfortunately, we know most of our classroom curriculum is developed to reach specific goals, or maybe even a specific goal. So the specific goal that I can think of that our standardized curriculum really is promoting, it's not higher level learning. It's really higher standardized testing scores. And the reason that it does that is because school funding is based off of standardized testing scores. Even teacher performance is rated on standardized testing scores. So the way that standardized testing is set up, there is no collaboration. There's not option. There's no creativity. It's usually, pick A, B, C, or D. And so we are, again, this is where we come into the input and output. We're giving students a lot of input so that they get the right output. And they're not able to think about the content that they're really learning. They just know, 2 times 2 is 4. They don't know why 2 times 2 is 4. They don't know how to use 2 times 2 is 4. But they can tell you that 2 times 2 is 4. And standardized testing really promotes that type of learning. And we know that that type of learning does not correlate with critical thinking. It does not prepare students to be functional and productive adults. So like I said, teacher performance, school funding, and all of these things are determined by standardized testing, which then, if you are a public school who maybe is in a low income area and you aren't getting the same funding, maybe a private school or a better performing school would have, what are you going to do? You're going to push teachers to get their students I learn or I read scores higher. And the way you're going to do that is, the format of the test is going to be, this is the question, here are 4 answers, pick the answer. So you're going to just tell them information and hope they retain it. You're not going to go in depth with the information. You're not going to make them question the information. You're not going to have them, spend a lot of time on the background of the information they're getting. You just want them to hear it and be able to repeat it. And if you're in a low-income school, that becomes really hard because you, obviously, as a teacher, want to have a high performance score. As an administrator, you're going to want your school to perform high as well because you need the funding. I mean, schools can't function without the funding. Most of school funding comes from the state, but they do get like a very small, like 1 or 2% from the federal government, which unfortunately, that 1 or 2% is what really mandates the standardized testing. So you're going to want to perform really well, which means that you're going to change your teaching tactics, and it's going to become less hands-on, less focused on content and understanding, and more on just being able to verbally repeat everything that you have learned. So standardized testing, like I said, what I'm trying to say is that only tests factual knowledge, and with that you have recall and comprehension. It doesn't focus anything on holistic learning. It doesn't focus on your connection with the learning, and it doesn't promote long-term learning. It's really just a short-term goal. So this forces creativity, critical thinking, and problem-solving skills to take a back seat. And it not only discourages critical thinking, but students with high critical thinking skills often, and I've seen this so many times, they often get mislabeled. And this students with the inability to think critically, then sometimes, but they often have the ability to memorize things very quickly because they don't have critical thinking skills, so they compensate with that, and they get mislabeled. So what you have now are students that can think critically, that are problem solvers, and they read that question. I've had this so many times, and as a teacher, you can't say anything. You can't say anything. Like, you literally just stand there and you're like, well, read it again. What do you think? But they ask these amazing questions about the questions that they're reading. They're like, yeah, but it could also be this, and this is why I think that. And like, they could be absolutely right, but that's not one of the choices, and you can't do anything about it. And then you have students that really struggle with relationships with their peers. They're not problem solvers. They are not emotionally mature. But because of this, they have compensated and they can memorize things really well. They don't understand how it works, but they know how to do it enough to get the right answer. And they'll score really, really high. And then you start seeing a disconnect as they get into the higher grades of where they're starting to struggle. And parents are like, I don't understand this. They've never struggled before. And it's like, well, when you get into like high school and stuff, there is a lot more, connection to learning that they weren't able to master in the earlier grades. And like I said, standardized testing doesn't really measure true intelligence. And that's what we really want to instill in our kids, because we don't have standardized tests as adults. Like, if you are at work and you need to make a decision and you need to make the best decision, you're not going to have an A, B, C, or D list to look at to try to discern from. Like, you have to be able to think critically in the moment, think efficiently, be able to communicate with your peers and collaborate and make the best decision. And we're not equipping students to be able to do that. So we're not setting them up for success. Like I said, oftentimes students with high critical thinking skills perform low to average on standardized testing because of the format of the test itself. So it's already, they're already at a disadvantage. This also increases then their pressure for performance, and that unfortunately usually leads to low self-esteem. And that low self-esteem usually creates mental blocks and makes it so that they really start questioning their ability to, interact with the content. And that's when you start seeing maybe students that were once really creative, able to do higher level work, then the majority of the students really start to fall back, or maybe just completely disengage with school altogether. And I think that a lot of kids that we see in high school that are brilliant really kind of become burnout because they they aren't allowed to question or use their skills in a way that really showcases their abilities. And like I said, that's just going to lead to lower student motivation. It's going to increase student anxiety, and all those things are going to negatively impact your learning environment. So we're just compounding all of these negative things on learning, and we're not even giving our students the tools they need to be able to be effective adults. So something I've always kind of asked myself is, if standardized testing is proven to not accurately measure student learning and growth, which there's so much data out there that shows that it doesn't, what would be a better alternative? So I don't do standardized testing in our school, in our classroom. I do a lot of these other things instead, and I actually find that I know my students on a deeper level and can integrate and scaffold work a lot more efficiently and effectively than I could when I was looking at MAP scores and I-STEP scores, because I know the student as a whole. I know their whole learning approach. So what are those things? Well, if you know me, you know the first one's going to be project-based learning. I think that project-based learning is great because it's hands-on, allows students to have autonomy in how they present the information that they're interacting with. And a lot of them, they're fun, so they're completely engaged, and therefore it goes into long-term memory. And so that's something that they're going to hold on to and be able to build from later in life. I think that using, like I said, that creative outlet like dramas, skits, performing arts, or even visual arts to represent learning is really important. Something that I do that I love, because one, I'm a big data collector, so I do collect a lot of data because I want to make sure all my students are showing growth. Because as soon as I see someone not showing growth, I want to know why that is so that we can get it fixed right away before they start losing motivation. Is we have portfolios. So I don't keep all of our work in a portfolio, but if there's like informal assessments, or even just some of the project-based learning that I do, we keep in portfolios. And I do that so that I can, one, keep track of their learning in a more visual way. And two, when students go back and look at their portfolios, it's really great for them, one, to see all that they have accomplished. And I think it helps parents really see the learning process as well and be a lot more involved in their students' learning, because learning shouldn't just quit at 3:00 when school ends. Sometimes that learning can be really enhanced or enriched by having conversations at home, and that's something that I try to encourage. Like I said, debates are a great way. If you're talking about a topic, have students, do you agree with this? Do you agree with that? Break them into groups and let them put their points and their perspectives all out there for everybody to kind of hear and listen to. That's a really great way to, one, have them do their research, really know why they feel a certain way about things, maybe even question, should I be thinking about this? Should I be thinking about that? And that's really what the learning process is all about. Like I said, I collect a lot of data, so I am a smaller school. I would not have been able to do this in public school because I had 30 to 32 students in my class at a time. But here, I can do a lot of one-on-one work. So I don't actually do any formal testing. I'd say the closest thing that I come to on formal testing would be like running records for reading when I'm trying to find like where their guided reading level is. Other than that, it's a lot of informal testing. So it's a lot of the questions that I'll ask them if we're reading something, or on their project-based learning, I'll look and see if they were asking specific questions or found certain answers and things like that. And then we can have like a one-on-one discussion about that. And that really helps me, one, helps them communicate. And two, it helps me see where their learning process started from and how it developed throughout the course of, the material that they were working with. Group instruction is really important. Collaboration is super important and something that we definitely want to promote with our students. And that collaboration is going to be a life skill that they're going to use the rest of their lives. So that's why I think that we really need to move from standardized testing to these informal methods, because one, we're really testing learning. We're looking at it as a whole. We're looking at the beginning, the whole process, and then this end product, rather than giving them information and really testing them on, can they verbally, recall what we told them without any connection to, do they know how to use this skill I just taught them? So I think that as educators, we need to be more purposeful in implementing opportunities and experiences for our students to develop and model and practice these critical thinking skills. We need to advocate and push for the elimination of standardized testing, and we need to replace it with these more effective alternatives. I think that there can still be teacher and school accountability without standardized testing. And I think that it's imperative, as we continue on and see that our students performing lower and lower and lower every year, at some point we need to quit blaming teachers, and we need to quit blaming students, and we need to start looking at the processes of which we're analyzing their test, their knowledge, and question, could that be where we're failing these kids? Could that be the cause to our problems? So I hope I gave you a lot of different things to think about today. I hope that you do your own research and come to your own conclusions, use those critical thinking skills. And I can't wait to see you on our next video. We have some really good ones coming up. I'm going to be interviewing some local schools and programs around our area that implement nature-based and play-based learning, and we're going to talk to them. So it's going to be nonprofits and even some public schools in this area, and we're going to be talking to them. And I'm also going to be doing a video here soon about how to do outdoor learning in winter, because here in Indiana it gets awfully cold, and so talking about using proper gear and safety things that go along with winter. So I think that could be really helpful to people who are just getting started. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing you on our next video. Make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you share this so that we can keep building our community together, and I wish you all the best. Thanks.